Okay, let's dive right into this. Have you ever climbed into bed just completely, utterly exhausted, only to have your mind suddenly come alive? You know the drill. You replay awkward conversations, you worry about tomorrow's to-do list, you cringe at mistakes you made literally years ago, or just imagine everything that could possibly go wrong. If this happens to you, I promise you are definitely not alone. In today's explainer, we're going to unpack the actual science behind why our brains do this, and more importantly, how we can finally get some well-deserved rest.
So, I want you to ask yourself right now, what is the specific thought that just keeps showing up when you're trying to fall asleep? Whatever it is, that 2 a.m. racing mind of yours, it isn't a flaw. It doesn't mean you're broken. It is a super common human struggle. Honestly, your brain isn't actually trying to torture you in the dark. It's really just trying to protect you.
Section 1, the 2 a.m. racing mind. See, during the day, your work, your responsibilities, social media, all those endless distractions, they keep your mind incredibly busy. You literally don't have the bandwidth to process everything. But at night, when the world gets quiet and all that external sensory input suddenly drops, well, your internal noise, all those unprocessed feelings and lingering fears, finally have the room to surface.
Which brings us to section 2, your brain on high alert. If you're living under chronic stress, maybe going through trauma, or experiencing big life changes like perimenopause, your nervous system might literally just be stuck on high alert. It stays in the state of chronic hyperarousal, basically running a continuous fire drill to keep you safe, even when your body is completely ready to rest. That's exactly why your mind just keeps actively searching for problems to solve. The biological mechanism behind all this is actually really fascinating. Meet your default mode network, or DMN. You can kind of think of it as your brain's internal planning committee. When you lie down and finally stop doing active tasks, this network powers right up to simulate the future and reflect on the past. Its goal is noble, right? To help you learn and prepare. But for chronic overthinkers, the DMN occasionally forgets to clock out. And this whole thing is compounded by something called the Zeigarnik effect. Almost a century ago, a psychologist noticed that cafe waiters had flawless memories for unpaid orders. But the very second a bill was paid, poof, they forgot the details entirely. Your brain does the exact same thing with social interactions and worries. Uncertainty keeps those events mentally active long after they end, mainly because your brain perceives them as incomplete tasks that desperately need solving. Now, when this loops endlessly, it turns into what researchers call perseverative cognition. It's really just a fancy term for continuous thinking about negative events in the past or the future. And the crazy thing is, it's not just in your head. These repetitive thoughts act like actual external stressors, causing very real physiological wear and tear. They physically increase your heart rate, they spike your blood pressure, and they elevate your cortisol levels, literally all while you're lying perfectly still in bed. So, how do we stop this? Let's look at Section 3, Why Silent Meditation Backfires. You've probably been told a million times to just, clear your mind, take deep breaths, or try silent meditation. But if you're dealing with chronic hyperarousal, those traditional sleep advice staples can actually be a huge trap. For highly anxious overthinkers, sitting in silent mindfulness often backfires completely and just makes the anxiety worse. This whole dynamic is a perfect example of what we call the sleep effort trap. Think about it. When you actively try to force sleep, you end up turning relaxation into the stressful, goal-oriented task. You're effectively trying to muscle your way into a peaceful state. And that only increases your physiological vigilance, basically screaming to your brain, hey, we really need to work hard at this right now. Which brings us to the ironic process theory, sometimes called the white bear effect. If I tell you right now, whatever you do, do not think of a white bear, what do you immediately think of? Exactly, a white bear. When you are mentally drained and try to forcefully suppress intrusive worries, it demands a ton of cognitive effort. This, ironically, just amplifies your brain's sensitivity to the exact thoughts you are so desperately trying to ignore. So let's look at a much better strategy. Instead of forced silent meditation, sleep researchers are actually pointing to something called cognitive diversion. See, silent mindfulness requires high cognitive effort to police your thoughts, leaving your default mode network totally vulnerable to rumination. Cognitive diversion, on the other hand, requires zero effort. By just listening to passive, structured audio stories, you occupy your working memory and smoothly decouple that default mode network without any of the strain. This brings us to Section 4, Emotional Intelligence and Sleep. There's a really powerful layer to all this. Research among university students found that poor sleepers consistently show lower emotional clarity and emotional repair scores. Basically, when emotional events aren't sufficiently regulated during the day, they absolutely result in sleep disturbances at night. This makes developing your emotional intelligence a totally vital tool in your overall sleep health. So instead of fighting your thoughts, you really need to learn how to become curious about them. Right before bed, ask yourself, what am I trying to control that I literally can't control tonight? Is this a real problem I can solve right now? Or is my anxious mind just desperately looking for certainty? What can I just let go of until tomorrow? Think about the psychological pivot from control and avoidance over to acceptance and commitment. This is the absolute core of acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. A key technique here is called cognitive diffusion, which just means creating some distance from your thoughts. Instead of treating a 3 a.m. worry as a factual command, you simply observe it as a passing mental event. You say to yourself, okay, I'm having the thought that things are going wrong, rather than fully believing that they actually are. All right, Section 5, Tools to Break the Cycle. How do we actually put all this into practice? Well, we need tangible, evidence-based, cognitive and somatic techniques to regulate the nervous system. The whole goal here is to build predictable safety routines before a nighttime crisis hits, fundamentally teaching your body that it is finally safe to rest.
First up is the constructive worry exercise. About 2 hours before you go to bed, grab a pen and write down your pressing problems, along with a few potential solutions. Then fold the paper and just leave it on your nightstand. If you start to worry in bed, you can actually remind yourself that you've already handled it at your problem-solving best. Writing it down physically allows that default mode network to suspend its search process because, hey, you successfully closed the psychological loop.
Next is an amazing somatic technique to address that physical wear and tear of hyperarousal. You gently tap the center of your chest with your fingertips, and then tap slowly on your solar plexus, right above the belly button. Breathe deeply while repeating a simple affirmation like, I allow myself to feel and release this. This kind of body-based support helps release physical tension and clearly signals to your activated nervous system that it's completely okay to stand down. And hey, if you are still stuck awake, you need stimulus control. This is a core rule of CBTI. Basically, if you've been awake in bed for 20 minutes, get up and leave the room. Now, I know leaving a warm, cozy bed at 3 a.m. seems incredibly counterintuitive. But trust me, it is a highly effective, science-backed way to break that conditioned association between your bed and the stress of hyperarousal.
Finally, Section 6, Making Peace with Thoughts. Ultimately, as you strengthen your emotional intelligence, regulate that nervous system, and create these healthy bedtime habits, you're going to begin to replace all that late-night overthinking with something far more valuable: peace.
Remember this absolutely crucial takeaway? Not every thought deserves your attention. Just because your mind says something does not mean it's true. You don't have to go to war against your own worrying. Like we said earlier, your mind is just trying to protect you. You just need to gently show it that you are already safe.
We're going to end this explainer on a really powerful thought. The goal isn't to stop thinking. The goal is to stop believing every thought that passes through your mind. So tonight, when the lights go out and the world gets quiet, what will you choose to believe? I really hope you found this helpful, and I wish you a very, very peaceful night's sleep.